Go through and look at what it takes to expand storage and provide additional storage into a database cloud service. So the first thing we do is we start out with a database cloud service. We do that by logging into our cloud services and then open a service console. We'll notice that we have plenty of space available to create a new service, but the first thing we have to do is go create a storage service. So with the authentication, we go into basic authentication. We go into the endpoint for the storage, and that can be figured out by going into the compute cloud service or into the dashboard. Let's go into the dashboard. It's a little bit easier to see that way. We go into the backup service. We can go into the storage cloud service, look at the service detail, and notice that that is the endpoint that we're going to go into. So we copy that. We do a quick get. What that does is it uses the authentication that we did with the basic authentication, comes back and says we've got 1, 2, 3 containers. Let's create a new container. We're going to call it rman. We'll do that by doing a put. It should come back with a response header saying created. So if we do a get on the service, it should come back and list rman is the new entry. So we now have a container called rman. That looks fine. We go into the service detail for for the database. We're going to create a new database service. We say create service. We're going to do database cloud service. We're going to do monthly charges. We're going to do the 12C release. We'll go with the high performance edition just to get some of the extra features. Over here, we're going to select the storage and then our container /rman. Use the cloud admin as the default. Come in with the password for the service. We're going to give it a little bit more memory than we normally do. We'll come in and bring in our keys. We're going to tell it that we want 256 gig of RAM, which will increase it a bit. So we're going to go up a little bit more than what we normally would go. And then tell it to go ahead and load the test data ahead of time. And at this point, we've got the database configured. We've got the profile that we want for the size. We've got the key. We bumped up the memory just a little bit, or bumped up the storage just a little bit. Gave it a password to log into the database with. We're using both cloud and local storage for backups. We gave it a container, which we created with the REST client. And then we're going to go in and say, go for it. Now, this will take a little bit of time because it's going to come in and create the services, which is perfectly fine. But what we want to do now is go in and say, what I'd really like to do is go into this service and make it bigger. And the question is, how do we do that? So come into the service and say, scale up this service. What we would like to do is add a terabyte of additional storage. We're going to create a new storage volume for it. We're going to keep the shape the same. So we're just going to say scale up the service. And it's going to go in and scale up for us. So if we sit here and look at the in progress, it's going to stop the compute resource and then increase this storage to, instead of 128 gig, to 1.1 terabytes, and we'll have additional storage. Now, this takes 15 to 20 minutes. We're actually going to wait on it, so I'll pause and come back when it's finished. And the key reason we're doing this is this isn't all we have to do. We then have to log into the session and increase the file system and increase the logical volumes that are the backing store for the service. Increasing the storage here increases storage, but it doesn't increase the storage allocated to the database. And those are the next steps we'll go in and do. At this point, we have a database that's been expanded. If we go into it, we can look at the history of what happened. We can see that we scaled up the service in that we increased the storage from 128 gig to 1.1 terabytes. Now, the next thing we do is we have to log into the system, because this storage is not allocated automatically into the server. And the way we do that is we log in. We use the auth key that we created the database with. This time we present the public key as opposed to, or the private key as opposed to the public key, and that allows us to log in. So we log in as OPC as opposed to Oracle, because that allows us to SU to root. You have to do an SUDO. So at this point, we're root, and we can see everything we need to. The one thing we have to do is look at the we have to look at the service and see what we created. So if we do a df-h, we see that we have, our expected 16 gig, 23 gig, 3.2 gig, but it mounted the dev xv dg1 as UO5, and that's not what we want. We actually want to add it to our volume group, and we're going to add that to our data group because we want to grow the data. So first thing we have to do is umount UO5. Look to see if it actually put it into the FS tab, which it did, and we're going to get rid of now. So we need to go in and modify the partition. What we're going to do is relabel this partition to a new. So that is done by going in and changing the partition type. To do that, you go in with the T, which says what partition type do you want. We're going to give it an 83, which is the code. I can print to see what it looks like, which is an ID of the Linux. Shoot, that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted an 8E, which is the Linux LVM, which is exactly what we want. Now we write it. From the right, we then go into VG Display, which shows us the virtual groups. We are going to add this to the data vol group. That's done with a VG extend. And we can copy and paste from So what this does is it goes in and attaches the new volume that we created into the data volume group. If we go in and look at the logical volumes, we've got the logical volume dev data vol group lvol0, which is what we're going to modify. So we do an lv extend. We're going to grow it to 1 gigabyte. What this does is it grows the logical volume. And we now have a logical volume that is substantially larger. So the data volume group is now 1 terabyte. We could make it a little bit larger because we do have a little bit of free space. We could make it 1.1 terabytes. But we're going to go ahead and leave it at 1 terabyte. Now the next thing we need to do is resize. We have to resize the logical volume group. And we tell it how big we want to make it. And it goes through and it crunches, and it takes a while. This process takes a few minutes. But basically what we've done now is we went through the resize operation, where we came in and said scale up. We're going to add new storage volume. The new storage volume mounted as UO5. We said, well, we really didn't want to do a UO5 logical volume. We wanted to add that to the data volume group because this allows us to create more table spaces and to grow our table space dynamically. So the first thing we had to do was unmount the drive because it automatically mounted as UO5. We had to change the file system type from Linux to Linux LVM, which is type 83. From 83 to 8E, I'm sorry. Then we went in and attached it to the volume group by doing a VG extend. Then we went into the logical volume and grew the logical volume with the LV extend. And then finally we did the resize 2FS, which says that the file system that is on the data volume group we want to grow to 1 terabyte. And once this is finished, we can do a df-h and see that the file system actually did grow to the proper size. So we started the resize operation so that it's going to grow the file system. If we look at the file system, we did a background process of the resize. Notice that it's running in the background as root. It's going along. We're currently at 403 gig. It's going to grow up to a terabyte, and we can monitor the progress as it's going along. So, you know, in the time we've been talking, it's grown from 403 gig to 407 gig. It takes a while. It does go, but you can do everything online and operational while it's going. So, just to quickly review what we did, we went in and added more storage to the database. By adding the more storage, we went in and it assigned it to UO5. We didn't want it to UO5. We actually wanted it to the data volume group. The benefit to having it there is it allows us to grow tables dynamically through ASM. And having it in the volume group, the logical volume manager takes care of where it is and high availability and everything else. What we really need to do is go in and grow the fast recovery area and the redo area, specifically the fast recovery area, because if we have a single database greater than 23 gig, we won't be able to back it up. So the concept, or greater than 42 gig. And since we have a terabyte of storage, typically you want about a half and half, where if you have a terabyte in the data volume, you want a half a terabyte in the recovery area so that I can recover everything and do it appropriately. So hopefully this is a good summary of how to grow table spaces and file sizes through the cloud service.